Hello, I'm here to ask you a favour before we begin this episode. I would really appreciate it if you could vote for Real Life Ghost Stories in the British Podcast Awards. Just go to britishpodcastawards.com/voting to cast your vote. You can vote once per email address and you have to verify your vote via email for it to count. It genuinely takes 30 seconds and you can vote from anywhere in the world. Am I likely to win? No. But do I enjoy turning a look at an event? Yes. And on a genuine note, it is such good free advertising for the podcast to have the name up there. So if you've enjoyed the podcast, if I've kept you company on a long journey, if I lull you to sleep at night with my dulcet tones, I would really appreciate if you could cast a little vote for Real Life Ghost Stories. And also, please do vote for any other indie podcasts that you listen to. The place to vote is britishpodcastawards.com/voting.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hey, Prime members. Are you tired of ads interfering with your favorite podcasts? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free podcasts. That's amazon.com/ad-free podcasts to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Hello and welcome to episode number 243 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And to kick things off this week, I would like to thank some of our newest Patreon subscribers. I would like to thank Naomi Vincent, Ashley Fisher, Siobhan, Sophie Elam, Bri B, Iris Kennedy, Ian Hennessy, Julia Faulkner, Charlie and Katie, Savannah Rodenbush, John Shaw, Kat Buckley, and Caitlin C. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. I love you and appreciate you every single day. And Bri B, I am aware that it may be Bri B, but I'm not sure which one it is. So I apologise if I got the wrong one. And our film review this week, our film review is MaXXXine. MaXXXine was released in 2024. It has 6.4 out of 10 on IMDb and 72% on Rotten Tomatoes. Los Angeles, 1985. With the elusive Night Stalker's killing spree gripping the city by fear, fiercely ambitious adult film star Maxine Minx nailed a make-or-break audition in the glitzy movie capital of America. But just as her star begins to rise, 6 years after surviving the merciless massacre in X, a shady private detective threatens to snatch away Maxine's precious ticket to mainstream stardom. Now the bloody stains of a dark past scream for closure. Can the televangelist's daughter secure her place in the spotlight, or will Maxine become a sad statistic along with Hollywood's every other dead starlet? And as always with these film reviews, I'm going to do likes and dislikes, starting with the likes. I love Mia Goth, and I make no secret of that. She was amazing in Pearl, she was amazing in X, and I think she's a very talented actor. And as I've said before, I'm not quite sure whether I fancy her or I want to be her, but I do think that it's probably both. Somebody commented on Instagram saying that they would watch Mia Goth paint a house, and I agree. I would too. And I really liked her performance in this. I thought she did very well with what she was given, and I was really rooting for her character. Like, I really wanted Maxine Minx to succeed, even though she is flawed and she will stop at nothing to become the type of famous that she wants to become. I also thought that visually this film was really beautiful to watch. So it gives the audience that kind of nostalgic taste of an 80s slasher. And there's lots of gorgeous, like, neon drenched shots of LA. And it's also set in a really interesting time period. So you've got the Satanic Panic is in full swing, and you see kind of glimpses of the Satanic Panic seeping into MaXXXine's life, where like there's protesters outside the film lots, the studio lots all the time who are protesting against like the satanic nature of Hollywood. And then you have the Night Stalker, who is, Richard Ramirez, which was a very real serial killer case, who kind of killed indiscriminately in LA, and people were terrified. And in this film, there just seemed to be so much to be frightened of, which is probably how people felt at the time. And to be honest, that's kind of the sum total of my likes column, because I just wasn't a massive fan of this film. So in terms of dislikes, I just didn't think that if the film lived up to the brilliance of the other two. I felt like both Pearl and X really sort of stood out in a world where there's a lot of Hollywoodization of horror films. And I thought that X and Pearl were really interesting and nuanced and dynamic. In the film X, there was the obvious slasher elements of the film. There was the evangelical elements of the film. And there was also this idea of the horror of growing old. And look, to be clear, I don't think that growing old is a horror. I don't think it's horrendous. But in society, women growing older is often seen as such a negative thing. And I thought that X explored that really well. Obviously Mia Goth plays MaXXXine, and then she also plays the old woman in that film. And I thought that was really clever and really well done. And then in Pearl, you had the horror of the mundane everyday life, this seemingly idyllic cookie cutter life of being this stay-at-home wife on a farm. And for Pearl, that is the absolute epitome of horror. And I thought those two films offered kind of an interesting commentary, but I didn't think MaXXXine did any of that. Pearl and X felt poignant and important, but I really felt like MaXXXine didn't bring any of that deeper meaning under all of that slashing and testicle stamping. Yeah, brace yourself for that if you haven't seen it, because yeah, that had me wincing. And to be honest, I really did think that Mia Goth was wasted in this film. Like, she was brilliant, like I said, brilliant with what she worked with. But like, there's so much more to her as an actor. We've seen in Pearl that she can deliver a monologue, But I just felt like she was wasted in this. And there just seemed to be like loads of different storylines, and none of them were intertwined satisfactorily or were completed well. And, I'm not saying this to brag, because a lot of things go over my head when I'm watching films, but I did figure out sort of exactly what was happening quite early on in the film. And I went to see this with a friend who had not seen either Pearl or X. So she was like, okay, fill me in briefly on what I need to know. And I kind of told her briefly what had happened in Pearl and X, and she figured out what was going on pretty early on as well, and I don't think that's a good thing for somebody who maybe hasn't followed the trilogy to immediately figure out the mystery of the story. It just felt really bitty, and it didn't feel like it had much substance to it. It didn't feel well thought out, and it felt like a cash grab, to be perfectly honest. I don't think it added anything to the story of Maxine Minx. I didn't feel like I understood her better. Like, I left the cinema feeling like, oh, that was kind of boring, and I wanted to know more about her. And my friend who I saw it with was like, I don't feel like I learned anything really about her character, which is kind of disappointing, really. Oh, and I do have one more thing actually to add to the likes column that I forgot about, which is that Kevin Bacon is in this film. I love Kevin Bacon. He's in this film. He plays the secret detective. What do they call it? Private detective. He plays the private detective, and he does it very well. I really enjoyed his character. And to give you an example of what I mean about it being sort of not very well thought out, there's this scene where Kevin Bacon is chasing Mia Goth through the film lots and they're running through all these different sets and it's very intense and she goes and hides in this house and it's all very intense. And then nothing happens. Like nothing, there is no sort of climax to that situation. Just nothing happens and we move on to the next scene. And I was like, what? That is so not well written. How did you think that was the finished scene? Anyway, look, is it worth a watch? Probably. But did I enjoy it? It was fine. I'm going to give it 3 stars. And it's only 3 stars and not 2.5 because of Mia Goth and Kevin Bacon. So do with that information what you will.
Hey, Prime members, are you tired of ads interfering with your favorite podcasts? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free podcasts. That's amazon.com/ad-free podcasts to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Okay, you can do this.
I know. Carvana makes it so convenient to sell your car. It's just hard to let go. My car and I have been through so much together.
But look, you already have a great offer from Carvana. That was fast.
Well, I know my license plate and VIN by heart, and those questions were easy.
You're almost there. Now to just accept the offer and schedule a pickup or drop-off.
How'd you do it? How are you so strong in letting go of your car?
Well, I already made up my mind, and Carvana's so easy.
Yeah, true. And sold.
Go to Carvana.com to sell your car the convenient way.
As dawn broke over the 7 seas, the pirates of the Crimson Galleon set sail for adventure. But there was one problem. Paperwork. Mountains of it. Filing, invoices, you name it.
This work ain't fit for a pirate.
Luckily, their captain had an idea. She used the smart buying tools on Amazon Business so they could work more efficiently and get back to doing what they do best. I know, right? Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying.
Which brings us to our story today. Now, our stories today are a compilation of camping stories, as you will have seen by the title. Now, this is, in some ways dedicated to the wonderful Sinead Hanna of The Poisoner's Cabinet, who is, at the time of recording, at the time of releasing this, probably camping with her husband, which is a lovely, wholesome thing to do, and I would like to bring some discomfort to that. So the links to where I got all the different stories in this episode are in the description. As always, let's get into it. Camping is that time-honoured tradition where the thrill of adventure collides headfirst with the grim reality of survival. Camping has not always been a leisurely pursuit, and technically we can trace camping all the way back to the beginning of civilization. But that was the type of camping that was literally for the survival of you and your people, not because the weather was good and you fancy a bit of the great outdoors. Recreational camping seems to have begun in the middle of the 19th century. During the Victorian period, people were in the grips of the Romantic movement, and there was a push to get back into nature and appreciate the green and wild expanses that the British Isles had to offer. It was fashionable to boat on the Thames and set up camp on the banks of the river. Sometimes these camps would be to have a picnic and lounge, but there were also records that show that some people set up shop for the night, which is probably the first instances of camping for fun. Simultaneously, camping gained popularity in the US, but it was probably the Camper's Handbook published in 1908 that really kick-started camping as we know it today. It was written by a man named Thomas Hiram Holding, who had spent his childhood travelling across the prairies of America with his family, and in his older life he enjoyed cycling around Ireland with his friends. Interestingly, this led to the development of national parks and protected areas. So, camping may be the devil, but there definitely are some historical positives to it. To me, I couldn't think of anything worse. You start off with a strangely Americanized romantic vision of communing with nature, roasting marshmallows by a crackling fire, and falling asleep under a blanket of stars. When I was little, I revelled in the idea of making s'mores and telling ghost stories around the campfire, which was mainly from watching American television. But what actually awaits you seems to be a series of unfortunate and completely avoidable events that make you question your life choices. There's the tent, which you proudly set up only to realise it's a sadistic jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces, and for some reason there was always missing pieces in my tents. Yes, I have done some camping. My disdain is from experience. After a few hours of struggle, you finally manage to erect your temporary shelter, which in the dead of night turns into a canvas sauna with the structural integrity of wet tissue paper. And then, just as you settle in for the night, the wildlife makes itself known. The mosquitoes, the general spiderage, the rustle of small creatures in the leaves, the rustle of larger creatures in the trees, and let's not forget the mysterious rustlings in the bushes that leave you wide-eyed in your sleeping bag, convinced that every noise is either a monster or a serial killer, or a monster working with a serial killer. The campfire is your only source of warmth and light, and while the smoky smell might seem charming at first, by the end of the night you're convinced you become a walking bonfire yourself, reeking of charred wood and desperation. But the true horror strikes when nature calls in the middle of the night. Armed with nothing but a weak flashlight and your dignity, you stumble through the darkness to find a designated bathroom, which is probably little more than a glorified hole in the ground, surrounded by enough spiders to make you reconsider your bladder's urgency. You do your business as quickly as possible, all the while glancing over your shoulder for lurking monsters, be they furry, many-legged, or something else entirely. I jest, of course. I understand that camping can be a wonderful, leisurely and wholesome pursuit if you've got the right equipment and maybe the right mindset. But of course it was inevitable that there would be camping stories. Camping horror stories. Being out in the wilderness with nothing to block out the horrors of the darkness. Those particular horrors, for some, become more and more real. Our first story today comes from the website Your Ghost Stories. I remember what had happened during a camping trip about 11 years ago when I was around 4 years old. My mom and dad had bought this used camper and they decided to bring me and my brother Pat. I don't remember much leading up to the events of what had happened at that camping ground, but I do recall that the camper was very old, probably from the 70s. My mom assumed that was the reason for the violent attack on us that one night we tried to stay at that campsite. Or even that the campsite was located above a Native American burial site where the soil had gone sour. Or at least that's what they called it. Or it could have been just from us trespassing. But whatever the case, something was definitely physically there. And it was something otherworldly, completely. And this would be my first encounter with the unknowns of the universe, unfortunately. I remember sitting around a campfire that night trying to make s'mores with my family, though they always seemed to burn my hands and tongs, they were so hot. I'm also starting to recall we cooked some weenies over the fire too. Anyway, it was getting dark, and everyone was getting tired, so we went into the RV to rest, though I wasn't very tired because I slept on the way there. I remember I was still so small that my mom let me share the bed with her. I tried to get some sleep, but as the night went on I still couldn't sleep. And then something happened, so terrifying, I still remember it vividly until this day. The camper started to shake and bang as something outside started to pound against the RV. My mom was the first to wake up and grasped me tight as she got real scared. I'm sure at first she thought it was a bear or something, but then whatever it was hopped on top of the roof and started to try and bust its way in using the emergency exit on top of the camper. I remember my mom got so scared she quickly tried to wake my brother Pat and my dad, but they seemed to be long passed out. Not even the constant banging would wake them. My brother Pat woke up for a second and asked what was going on, but then seemingly passed out again. I remember my mom was near to crying. She was so scared for her family and for herself, I'm sure. My mom's a very religious person, so she got out a prayer book and started praying. And what was I doing? I was sitting there calm, in my mom's arms, as whatever it was out there was wrecking the hell out of the camper. I wanted to look out the curtains to see what it was, but my mom wouldn't let me. Although I did see a shadow. It looked like a dinosaur on 2 legs. Something I'm sure nobody's ever seen before. As my mom began to pray more and more, it seemed to anger the creature. It went crazy outside. Now I wonder what kind of creature could keep up that strength to seemingly go on for hours until daylight, just pounding away at our camper like that. Throughout the night, my mom began to fear for my dad's life, as he began to seemingly stop breathing, and she would wake him every few minutes for a mere second to make sure he was still breathing. To this day, my mom still believes that while my brother and dad were sleeping, the thing outside was trying to possess them so we could use them to kill us. But I don't know about that. I watched the sun slowly rise as the blue sky began to light up, but even in the pale sunlight the creature persisted relentlessly. My mom read all night to me the prayers in that book, and I still think I may recall some. The creature finally stopped attacking the camper, and my mom was relieved for a short while. That is until my brother woke up to the banging 5 minutes before it stopped. After the banging had stopped, he wanted to go outside to get his shoes that he had left outside, even though he had woken up to the banging of some psychopath outside. My mom pleaded with him not to go outside, but you can't keep a teenager from his Vans shoes, I guess. He miraculously made it back unharmed with his shoes, but he did tell us about some weird footprints outside, and claw marks all over the camper. And that's when my mom knew this was no ghost, but some kind of physical manifestation of some creepy shit. My dad woke up soon after like nothing had happened. He basically slept through the whole thing. But my mom, on the other hand, was very brave in my opinion. After my dad woke up, my mom told him all about it, and he was sceptical about it all. After all, my dad didn't even believe in an afterlife back then, even though he went to church every Sunday. Everyone went outside to look at the damage. My mom tried to keep me indoors for fear the creature would come back. It was daylight now, and the other campers were wondering what the hell was going on as well. We all saw the damage the creature had done. Footprints on the ground of a 3-toed beast, claw marks inches thick into the thin camper's walls. My mom urged my dad to get us out of there fast. She wasted no time. Even after seeing the evidence of the creature, my brother and my dad denied it, and forgot. But that was perhaps the scariest night for my mom and the longest for me. On our way out of the camping area, police were on their way in and questioning the owners. For what reason? I can only assume it was because of the ruckus that creature made all night long. They should have gotten there sooner. No kidding with that last part. That night seemed to go on forever. I remember that like it was yesterday. I think my dad had taken some pictures of the creature's footprints in the mud just for pure interest, but I'm sure they are lost somewhere. So all I've left from that night is my memory, and the only ones who really remember anything are me and my mom, and I was 4, so some details may be left out. But it was definitely a night to remember, and the longest night of my life. Now let me tell you, if I was that mother in that situation, I would be booting my husband until he woke up. I'm sorry, I'd be like, you're not sleeping through this. Possessed or not possessed, you know, I am waking everybody in that caravan up and we're all going through this together. And I have to say that bizarrely, it's not the first time that I've come across stories where people have encountered sort of large lizard type creatures or even dinosaur-esque creatures. So you'd have to believe that something happened on that campsite, right? Because the police rocked up the next day. Were this family the only family who experienced the rocking and the, you know, creature attacking their camper van, or did other people on the campsite experience things too and the family just didn't wait around to find out? I do find this story very strange in that I find it really bizarre that the dad and the brother just didn't wake up when all this was happening. I would have loved to heard the mother's perspective, you know what I mean? Was it really all night? Was it that violent? Although, I mean, you know, if the camper van was covered in scratches the next day and there was footprints around the camper van, maybe I'm just being too cynical. Although I will also say that if I was in that situation where there was a monster outside of my camper van ripping it to shreds and my son woke up and was like, I need to go get my Vans, I'd be like, the Vans are lost. Okay, the Vans are no more. And I love a pair of Vans. I wear Vans to death. So I appreciate that a good, comfortable pair of Vans is an important part of your wardrobe. But is it worth coming face to face with a dinosaur monster? I don't think so. Right, let's move on to the next story. My tale takes place a few weeks back while camping in the bush. This was my first break in several months from work, as I'm now a roadie for international bands. I decided to go camping with 2 old mates up in the bush for a few days, far away from the world as possible. I'm an experienced bushman and camped in the bush many a time over the years. We heard about a place way out at the back of a small town named Kyogle in northern New South Wales, at the back of Mount Lindsay. The locals call it Yowie country. A Yowie is the Australian equivalent of Bigfoot, an aboriginal mystic creature like the bunyip. So just before the entrance to Kyogle is the gateway to the national park. After a few hours of driving, we finally found the old road that led to our purposed camping site. It was located on an old, disused logging trail. Not many people, in fact no one, goes anywhere near here, which made it better for us. We left the truck 5 miles from where we camped and made our way up through the dense forest along the barely recognisable track, avoiding snakes and jumping ants. Yes, we got ants that jump and attach themselves to your private parts and sting the bloody hell out of you, before we reached our site. It took about 20 minutes to set up the site, tarpaulin over the branches to prevent the rain from wetting us. We're in a drought, but old habits are hard to break. A pit to bury our beer in to keep it cool, and also food buried in it as well, and a decent fire pit. We gathered wood and twigs and we were ready for a good night of playing cards and drinking beers, you know, the usual BS. The night was clear, as I remember, and hot. There was no moon, but the stars were like little eyes peering down at us. I had to go to water the old lizard and stumbled off with a torch into the bush, hearing the lads catcalling out saying, "Beware the boogeyman." I was more concerned about the bloody deaf adders and brown snakes, never mind the bloody boogeyman. As I was doing my business and gazing at the stars, a strange and horrible smell like something rotten overwhelmed me. Like as if someone had let off a fart that stunk so bad that it really made my eyes burn and water. I stumbled back, gagging, but as I was stumbling back to the campsite, I thought I heard a deep growl, like when your stomach rumbles when you had nothing to eat, but louder. The hairs on the back of my neck rose as I quickly hurried back to the site. I told the other 2, but they said that it must have been some animal, so we went back to our card playing. It was 11:45 by now and I was dead beat. I had my sleeping bag already unrolled and crawled off after saying goodnight to the other 2 and slid into the bag. It wasn't long before I passed out. I don't know how long I was asleep, but the 3 of us were suddenly woken up by the strangest, spookiest, loudest, piercing scream that I've ever heard. It was not human. It was inhuman. We sat up and looked at each other, and we heard loud crashing coming towards our campsite, like a bulldozer ramping through the bush. Whatever the hell it was big. Then I saw it. Something massive, well built, come crashing through the forest. I couldn't make out the details, but it looked strangely like a human, or even better, a gorilla. The smell will haunt me to the end of my days. It was that rotting stench like a corpse. This thing stood over 7 foot tall as it came tearing through the campsite and then vanished into the night. We all jumped up, gibbering like madmen about what we had just witnessed. Was it just some hippie that had smoked some potent weed? No, it can't have been. It was too tall and well built to be a person. I tell you this, none of us slept that night. I had the hatchet ready. while one of my mates had a huge branch. The other, I don't know what he had, but we waited until dawn popped its head over the ridge before we left. What we saw in the daylight frightened the Christ out of us. The small saplings were all bent back and snapped. Some of our gear was trampled beyond repair, but we were shaken and stirred by our experience that we drove into town. We didn't tell the locals about what we saw or heard, in case they thought we were nuts. I did find out that a few weeks after we saw that, someone else had the same experience a few miles from where we were. Just to note that if you go and click on the link for this particular story, the writer does say some very problematic things that I removed from the story. They added nothing to the story, but just to give you that warning. And also to let people know that we're not just going to be talking about cryptids in today's episode, because I know that some people don't like cryptid stories and prefer ghost stories. There are also ghost stories. There's something for everybody in this episode. And kind of similar to the Loch Ness Monster, if somebody turned around to me and said, hey, Bigfoot is real, or the Yowie is real, I wouldn't be surprised. I certainly wouldn't be going out looking for it, but I wouldn't be surprised. And I'm always struck by the fact that Aboriginal people in Australia for years talked about this great flood that happened. It was passed down via word of mouth. It was a story that they told that everyone thought was just like an old story. And then, years later, like only recently, scientists discovered that this story that had been passed down by word of mouth for generations, centuries, millennia, was actually real. It was a real flood that had happened. So I just feel like if I was going camping somewhere and the Aboriginal people, the Indigenous people were like, oh yeah, that's Yowie country, that's what we call it, I'd be like, well, I'm not fucking going there. And genuinely, regardless of whether it was an actual Yowie or something else, I think that these people experienced something that shocked them to their core. And on to the next story. I was still living in Singapore when it happened. I was in grade 6, I think, but I'm not so sure. One day it was decided that my class and 2 other classes were going on a camping trip, 3 days and 2 nights. It turned out that the place we were camping at was right next to a cemetery. I don't really remember the name of the place though. There were 2 long houses made of wood, one for the girls and one for the boys. Inside it were 2 rows of double bunk beds on each side, all the way to the other end. On the first day we did a lot of activities. When night time came, all the girls and guys went inside to get ready for bed. These 2 houses had 2 huge double doors. They were really tall. So everyone was pretty tired and soon drifted off to sleep. I slept on top of the bunk bed. I suddenly woke up and I didn't really know why exactly. It was around 2 a.m. I could hear someone making these panicked noises, like someone was scared, making these tiny screams from the other row of bunk beds. So I got up and crawled to the end of the bed to check out what it was. It was dark, but I could still see. My heart was beating faster and faster at this point. I looked around to see where the noise was coming from, and there it was. A girl from the other class was at the bottom of the bunk bed. She was panicking so much and trying to wake her friend sleeping next to her. Her bed was right next to the huge doors. So I was wondering, what was she scared of? Until I looked at what was right next to her. It was this woman with long white hair, white dirty skin, a white dress, and she had an eye on her forehead. The woman was staring at the girl and pointing at her with her long nails. Her nails seemed so rotten. I just froze. I got so scared and my heart was beating so fast that I thought I was going to get a heart attack. I didn't dare to move because every time I moved, the bed made noises. The bunk beds were pretty old. I was afraid that the woman would turn to me if she heard a noise. I silently watched as the woman reached her finger closer to the girl. Her friend wouldn't wake up, so she quickly jumped over to her friend's side of the bed and hid under the blanket. The woman was still there though. But I also wanted to hide under my blanket, and so I did as fast and quietly as I could. I didn't even breathe. I was dead quiet. Eventually I drifted off to sleep, and nothing happened after that. On the second night, scary things were happening again. It was around 9 p.m. and we had a tiny concert in an outside hall. Soon it got to 10 p.m. and my friends and I needed to go to the toilet, so we went to the outside toilets that were far away on the other side near the cemetery. There were 3 of us. We went into the female bathroom and it was pitch black in there. There were 3 bathroom stalls. The lights did not work and we got creeped out, especially me. We really needed to wee, so one was holding the door open so that light could get in. One would go to pee and the other one would just stand there, which was me, and wait for my friend to finish peeing. Then when she finished, my other friend went and did her business and I had to hold the door, and it was finally my turn to pee. Gosh, I was so relieved that it was finally my turn. And while I was peeing, my friends that were holding the door open yelled my name to hurry up and finish because they saw this ghost with long black hair on the ceiling where the last stall was. They told me something was there, and then I panicked and pulled my pants up and opened the toilet stall door. And by the time my friends saw me coming out, they just ran off. I didn't even dare to look at what was on the ceiling. The door almost closed on me and I quickly opened it as fast as I could and ran like hell. I caught up to my friends that were still running. Like, how could they just run and leave me? While we were running, we heard loud running footsteps behind us, which seemed like it was coming faster and faster afterwards. We did not want to look back. We just kept on running. All of us screamed like hell and kept on running and running. I panicked so much. I didn't know what to do other than running. The footsteps were still there, and by the time we finally reached the hall where everyone was, we turned around and found nothing. The footsteps were also gone. It was so loud though. Our hearts were beating like there was no tomorrow. It was then 12 a.m. and everyone went to get ready for bed. This time I was sleeping on the bottom of the bunk bed. Everyone went off to sleep and so did I. The bunk beds on my side were where the windows were right behind us. The windows aren't like normal windows. I don't know how to describe them, but it's really easy to hear from outside. So then once again I suddenly woke up. This time it was nearly 4 a.m. I then started to think of what happened and got so scared. I could hear something from behind, outside the window. I didn't really know what it was until it got louder and louder. And yes, it was the footsteps again. This time it sounded like someone walking really slowly. It was even creepier than the previous one. I tried waking my friend by shaking her really hard. She was sleeping next to me, but she wouldn't wake up. I still heard the footsteps and my heart was beating really fast. I quickly climbed up to my other friend and hid under the blanket. She was still sleeping though. She thought I was a pillow, so she put her leg and her hand over me, and I felt safer, and so I fell asleep. It was 8 a.m. when I and everyone else woke up. We packed and left, and I will never return to that place ever again. That's what we get for camping next to a cemetery, right? I had a cursory look to see if I could find any legends from Singapore about one-eyed entities, like one-eyed female entities, but I couldn't find any. Although there is like an image in my brain of a picture of a woman with sort of long scraggly hair and an eye in the middle of her forehead. But I'm not sure where I got that from. I did have a look, as I said, and I can't find any kind of one-eyed entities outside of Japanese folklore. So if anyone does have any clues or ideas, let me know. Here's my thinking though about this story. I am very skeptical of this story, and I feel like this is potentially nightmares, bad dreams, potentially a version of sleep paralysis combined with a load of kids with overactive imaginations on a camping trip. And I don't necessarily think that what they heard was footsteps. Maybe it was misremembered, misinterpreted. God, that makes me sound super cynical, doesn't it? And I also think that surely you'd go to the girl who was freaking out over the woman with the one eye, and you'd say, "Did you see that too?" You'd have a conversation about it. I mean, maybe this person did. Maybe they did have a conversation about it, but it doesn't sound like they did. And even if you were like, "Oh, I don't want to be seen as weird here," you could go, "Oh my God, I had the weirdest dream about you last night, where this one-eyed woman was standing next to your bed and you were really scared. The dream that I had was really scary. It was just a dream, right?" And when I was younger, you know, the few times that I camped, I would do anything. We would all do anything to scare the shit out of each other, including saying things like, "Oh my God," you know, if you're going to the toilet in a horrible old outhouse and you're like, "Oh my God, I think there's somebody standing in the corner," you definitely would do stuff like that to scare the shit out of your friends. And we actually have another story from Singapore. This story happened last week when my friends and I were camping on Pulau Ubin Beach in Singapore. I was packing my haversack with food and drinks. My friends and I intended to camp overnight on the beach. We met in the port and we were excited because this was the first time that we were camping on Pulau Ubin Beach. When we reached there, it was almost evening. We quickly built a tent under a huge coconut tree. Then we started to build a fire. We had a hard time starting the fire because we could not find many sticks there. By the time we started the fire, the sun had set. All types of animals were lurking in the darkness. Then, we saw 5 boats sailing towards us. When they reached the shore, we could see that they were not human. They were ghosts. The people were almost transparent, armed with long rifles with a bayonet stuck at the tip. When we saw this, we quickly hid in the tent. There were about 20 of them, and they were dressed like Japanese soldiers from the movies. Then they came across our tents, mumbled some language that we could not understand, and walked past. In a few minutes, we heard villagers screaming for help like they were being killed. Then we could hear planes zooming above us, and next came an explosion. After a few minutes, it became silent. We could only hear the waves rushing up to shore. We then took a look at the environment, and it was normal, no smoke or anything. We quickly packed our stuff and went back home. The next day, we met at the National Library, where we did research on Pulau Ubin and found out that in the past, the Japanese had invaded Pulau Ubin and killed many innocent villagers. So what we saw on the beach were spirits roaming around. I mean, listen, right? Look at the episode we did on the Roman soldiers in York. It happens where these moments in history seem to play out over and over again. Imagine the terror, though, if you're camping out with your friends on the beach, you see boats arriving, you see shit, those look like army uniforms. They've got guns. Next minute you hear villagers screaming, explosions, blah, blah, blah. You'd be shitting yourself. Never mind the supernatural element of it. You'd be thinking, oh my God, I'm about to be murdered on the fucking beach by invading soldiers. I also like that they did follow-up research to try and explain what happened to them on that beach. How fascinating, though. I'm pretty sure that I would simply just die. And I would be absolutely raging to have to suffer the indignity of dying while camping. On to the next story. When I was 11 years old, my school held a 2-day and 1-night camping experience in the school. It's a Chinese school in Malaysia. The camping experience was held only for the 11-year-old students, or, as according to the Malaysian education system, Standard 5 students. There were exactly 229 students in the 5th standard, boys and girls together. The afternoon went well as half of the night. At 10 p.m. Malaysian time, we were having a barbecue session. I have a large group of friends consisting of 32 friends, boys and girls of different cultures and religions. My 6 best friends and I are usually the type of people to jump headfirst into any supernatural situation. But that night, even we were shocked to the core. That night had been a Thursday night, and it is usually believed by Malaysians that ghosts are extremely active and love to wander and disturb people the most on Thursday nights more than any other normal night. I remember making howling sounds out of nowhere just to remind my friends that it was a Thursday night. It was all fun and laughs, until Amira, one of my best friends, screamed suddenly and said that there were red eyes looking at us from the storeroom bell tower on the top of the office building. Not only had she seen it, but also a few other Chinese students had spotted it as well. Although when she screamed at us to look, there wasn't anything there. That was when all of us students felt a chill run down our spines. The teachers didn't notice our silent panicking at all. All of us students were silently panicking, having that gut feeling that something was wrong. Behind us was the block containing the Standard 6 students' classrooms. It was the darkest building there at the moment. Some of us turned completely. Some stood up and walked closer to the building to get a closer look. Others were only sending glances, either wishing to catch a glance of something, or nothing at all, but just doing it to appear brave. I was one of the ones to move closer to the building to get a closer look. Alas, I found nothing. Instead, when I looked at the block building which contained our classrooms and the 3rd standard students' classrooms, I saw a woman. with messy long black hair covering her face, wearing a long white dress which was blood-stained, and she was looking directly at all of us students. The scariest part about it was that it was my classroom. I stood, shocked at the sight. Some people ran away towards the tents in the arenas. Some people started screaming and crying. Some people ran to the toilet out of fright with friends. My group and a few other groups of friends were still there in the barbecue area. The teachers told us to just continue eating at the camping area, which is the big assembly hall for the girls and the small assembly hall for the boys. That was a night I could never forget. We all saw that woman. It certainly scared all of us. But luckily it didn't disturb any of us at all other than that scene that night. After that, there were rumours that started circling the school, saying that the ground the school was built on was a graveyard. Then it became a mental hospital before becoming our school. I don't believe in those rumours, seeing as the ones that spread them had no solid proof. But I know what I saw that night with my own eyes. There was a ghost woman standing in my classroom. I love that the teachers seemingly just didn't react to groups of children running and screaming helter-skelter willy-nilly, running to their tents, running into the toilets, running around, and the teachers are like, yeah, don't worry about it. As an ex-teacher, there are lots of things that I would ignore, but children running and screaming is not one of those things that I would ignore. It is, however, admittedly, very easy to spook a large group of children. That sort of mob mentality is strong with a big group of children. Think about the Gorbals vampire, where all those Glaswegian children were like, there's a vampire in the playground, but instead of getting spooked, they all just went to it and got weapons to kill this vampire, which is still one of my favourite paranormal stories. And look, maybe that school did have a history, you know? I would love to know what the name of the school is. The writer specifically said they didn't want to name the school, but I would be looking up the history of that school. And to be honest, it's not often that you're in school overnight. In all my years of teaching, there was one night that we did an overnight in the school to raise money for charity, but that was once in a long time, 10 years. And a school is a very different place at night time than it is during the day. So who's to say? You know, maybe it did have a deep, dark history, and maybe those kids really did see something. And it sounds like they saw actually two very different things. Red eyes, and then this blood-covered woman. And I have one more story for you today. Just after finishing our GCSEs, a group of my friends and I went camping. The weather was naff, and on the whole huge campground there was pretty much just us and a group of Irish scouts. So we all ended up hanging out together along with the youngish guys who ran all the activities on the site. Technically, any activities had to be booked and paid for in advance, but these guys were bored, so they let us do anything that didn't involve expensive equipment for free. On our last night, they took us on the pathetically unscary ghost walk. It was so wussy that we took over in the end and started telling them creepy stories. When we were all pretty much ready for bed, our group went across the field to our tents, all laughing and joking, until one of the other girls stopped still and said loudly, "What's that in front of our tent?" There was a short, white figure pacing in front of one of the tents, about 30 feet away from us. It was dark, but we could all see it as a solid-looking shape. One of the girls screamed, and it stopped pacing and rushed at us. I have never run faster in my life. I lost my shoes halfway across the field and kept going straight onto the tarmac road and down to the activities buildings. We went back with about 20 scouts and some burly guys with big lanterns, but there was nothing to be seen. Who knows, it was probably just mist or something, but it was shit scary at the time. Hasn't put me off camping though. A short white figure pacing in front of your tent. Sounds to me like could be to do with fairies. We often think of fairies as little winged creatures, but actually in a lot of Irish folklore they are human-sized, shaped, maybe sometimes a bit smaller, but glow in an iridescent white glow. So that feels like it's a potential thing. But also it just could be an angry spirit who's like, get out of my grounds, get off my land, get off my swamp. And just to be really clear, I am only partially joking about hating camping and how nobody should go. Camping is great, like I do understand that. A lot of the camping that I have done over the years was festival based and very uncomfortable with shoddy equipment, you know. Nowadays, if I went camping, I know that I'd be bringing equipment that would mean that I'd be comfortable and happy. So, you know, please do take all of my slagging off of camping with a massive grain of salt. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. As always, the links to where I got all the stories from will be in the description of this episode. And if you have a story that you would like to share, you can email it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website, reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
As dawn broke over the seven seas, the pirates of the Crimson Galleon set sail for adventure. But there was one problem: paperwork. Mountains of it. Filing, invoices, you name it.
This work ain't fit for a pirate.
Luckily, their captain had an idea. She used the smart buying tools on Amazon Business, so they could work more efficiently and get back to doing what they do best. I know, right? Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying.